Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube for the latest episode of Broncos Now. As always, I'm your host, Sydney Jones. And coming up on today's episode, the Broncos wrapped up their joint practices here at Centura Health Training Center today. And head coach Sean Payton and all three coordinators spoke to the media following today's practice to discuss the team's work versus the Rams the past 2 days. All that and more coming up. Well, that's a wrap on joint practices here at Centura Health Training Center. The Broncos held their second and final joint practice versus the Rams today, and head coach Sean Payton seemed pleased with how the last 2 days went.
I felt like we had a little bit more juice today, just being out on the field. We kind of talked about it last night. I was real pleased with the 2 days we got with the Rams in that, you know, before you ever start, there's certain things you hope for, and I thought both clubs did a great job of handling the drills, and I thought the teams and the players did a good job of, we get better when we do this. You know, first off, we see other schemes, other thoughts, kind of stimulates, your think tank a little bit, and it also, I think, it changes the routine up. You know, you're getting more. Those are a lot of team snaps. I don't know if we tallied them up. We're over 120 team snaps, and so that's huge when it comes to the evaluation process. Just more information.
Unfortunately, the big news coming out of today's practice was wide receiver Jerry Jeudy was carted off. Head coach Sean Payton and offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi gave an update on him following today's practice.
No, it's a hamstring. He'll get an MRI. We'll kind of see where he's at with it.
No, I mean, I haven't heard anything more than just watching him come off the field. But, all injuries are unfortunate, and, we'll see what the severity of his injury is. But, we got a lot of guys in that room. Someone's going to have to step up.
Defensive coordinator Vance Joseph also spoke to the media today and gave his opinion on the defense's performance the past 2 days versus the Rams.
Yeah, yesterday wasn't good enough, obviously. We came out flat, the first couple plays in 7-on. It was like slow motion, like a jog through, walk through pace, so I was shocked by that. But we addressed it last night, and we came out this morning with better energy, and it showed in our play.
And like head coach Sean Payton mentioned earlier, the team had more juice out there today, and that's the type of energy Vance Joseph hopes to see from his defense every day.
My point to the guys yesterday was we can't start games that way. Last week against San Fran, the first 4 or 5 plays, we were out of sorts. Even in Arizona, the first drive wasn't great. It was okay, so just building the mindset of being dominant from the start and not waiting to be dominant. If most good defenses and most good offense, their first 15 plays are their best plays. So if you can nail those, man, it sets for a good day. So we can't be a team that eases into games and give up field goals in the first drive, and that's not who we want to be. So that can't happen.
And looking ahead to the Broncos' final preseason game on Saturday, head coach Sean Payton gave an update on whether or not starters will play.
There may be a few, because it's a little trickier than just saying, all the starters aren't starting or playing, but you do have to play 4 quarters, and you don't want a certain half of your roster, getting 60 snaps and risking injury either. So we'll have that meeting tonight.
Now joining me here inside the Broncos podcast studio is Broncos lead writer Eric Dalala. Eric, joint practices are in the books. We heard earlier in the show from head coach Sean Payton. He said team had more juice out there today. Overall, what did you think about day 2?
Yeah, I agree with head coach Sean Payton. There was more energy out there, especially early in the practice. The first couple of team periods, there was no one-on-ones today, no 7-on-7. They just went straight to team action. And early in the practice, the Broncos for sure had the upper hand. Nick Bonito would have had a sack on Matt Stafford. Zach Allen would have had another from a first-team defense perspective. Josie Jewell almost had an interception. Drew Sanders might have had a near chance at an interception. And the second-team defense was out there. So a lot of good stuff from that unit. And then offensively, I thought the Broncos moved the ball pretty well. There was a play down the sideline to Cortland Sutton, made a catch, and a couple other completions. I think Marvin Mims had one. So it looked good early, and you saw that energy. Wasn't quite as sharp maybe the rest of practice. The Rams certainly got some big plays, especially against the Broncos defense. And then the offense maybe wasn't quite as sharp as it was early. A couple of drops again. Of course, the big story is Jerry Jeudy's injury, and it did seem like, especially on the offensive side of the ball, maybe not as much success once Jerry went out. But I think overall, a good day of practice. It definitely was a step up from yesterday, and competitive overall between the two teams.
Yeah, really unfortunate news with wide receiver Jerry Jeudy. We heard Sean give an update on that earlier in the show, Eric. Hopefully, nothing long term. We'll see what the MRI says. But, looking at the wide receivers as a whole, of course, Tim Patrick went down early in camp. Who do you really expect to kind of step up in their places?
Yeah, and as Sean Payton said, a little early to figure out exactly what everything is going to look like, just because as we're recording this, we haven't heard anything about Jerry Jeudy's status. Listen, several guys are going to have to step up if he misses any time, and that doesn't matter if it's one game or 1 week or whatever it might be. You've got Courtland Sutton, but he's going to face increased attention if Jerry Jeudy's not out there.
Yeah.
And so then you look at guys like Marvin Mims, a Brandon Johnson, who I think was playing really well before his injury, and he's back now. You've got Marquez Callaway, Lil Jordan Humphrey, both who came in from New Orleans as options. Kendall Hinton is a guy that we've heard being talked about as a smart player.
Yep.
We know, Montreal Washington, for example, has the speed. We haven't seen it necessarily translate as much to the offensive side of the ball in games. And then you've got some of these guys that are competing for spots, whether it's a Bandy, a Taylor Grimes, some of those guys that are fighting for positioning here, for lack of a better word. But yeah, obviously the hope, knock on wood, is that Jerry's okay, that he's able to be back, no matter when that is. But guys will have to step up. I do think the biggest difference will be that Courtland Sutton will just see more attention than maybe he would have otherwise. And
For sure.
maybe you have to look elsewhere to get the passing game going, whether that's to the running backs, which we already know they're going to be a big part of this passing game.
Right. Good point.
The tight ends, Greg Dulcich, Adam Troutman. Those are guys that might have to do a little bit more to supplement Jerry Jeudy if he ends up missing time. But again, a little premature at this point to speculate about all that.
Right. We heard head coach Sean Payton talk following yesterday's practice about, rather than, really evaluating what he saw in film, he wants to look at today and the corrections that the team's going to make. So for you, Eric, where did you feel like the team, made the biggest improvement from yesterday?
Yeah, I think it was defensively, just the strong start, the energy. Vance Joseph talked about it, that wasn't acceptable. That wasn't good enough. He was shocked when he saw them in that first 7-on-7 period, thought it kind of looked like slow motion. And they were certainly better as the practice went along yesterday, but I think you saw that continue at the start of today, and just the pressure they got, the way they were able to fluster Matt Stafford, who later in practice I think showed you still the type of quarterback he is with some of these deep throws. He's a really good player. And so to have that success speaks volumes about what this Denver defense was able to rebound and do. It was better in some ways in terms of the pre-snap penalties offensively. They still happened. There were still a few times when the Broncos had to go back in the huddle. But I think from a focus standpoint and an energy effort type of deal, it was definitely better. And that's what we heard Sean Payton say yesterday, right? Is it's not just about learning how to be mentally tough enough to play. It's about being mentally tough enough to play to win and close out these games that are close. Feels good about where the Broncos are from a conditioning standpoint, but all those things kind of play together as you look to put a complete football game together. And obviously the Broncos are in the process of making that all work.
Yeah. It was a good week in terms of injured guys coming back to practice. And today we saw Mike Purcell return. Haven't seen him all training camp. And I know, Vance Joseph has talked a lot about the defensive line and, how much depth they have there, but really good to see him back too.
Yeah. And we've, we heard people earlier in training camp say, hey, Mike Purcell's what makes this thing all go.
Yeah.
He's a critical piece on that defensive line. Obviously was on the non-football injury list, passes his physical, comes back, and is out at practice today. They're still going to be smart as they work him back just because he hasn't played much football. But he's a guy that obviously big guy, veteran, a good football player, and can really clog up those running lanes. So as the Broncos look to get better against the run, and I said, we'll have to see what happens, right? We don't know if Josh Jacobs is going to be out there week one. He's still holding out, but certainly if Josh Jacobs is playing for the Raiders or whoever's back there, having a guy like Mike Purcell up front to help slow that rushing attack down is a big deal. So it was starting to get to the point where I was like, oh, when is he going to be back out there? Because we're now, almost 2 weeks from the season, essentially. We're getting close here. And so you need these guys to have a little bit of ramp up time. And so it was getting to the point where I was like, I wonder if Mike Purcell is going to be back or what the deal is with him.
Yeah.
Passes his physical. He's back out there, and certainly a positive step as we approach week 1.
Definitely. Well, Eric, looking ahead to the Broncos' final preseason game here on Saturday, I know Sean Payton said earlier that, maybe a few starters will play. That'll be kind of a case-by-case basis. But for the Broncos' final game here, what are you really going to be watching for on Saturday?
Yeah, I think that there are individual guys that are still fighting for roster spots or fighting to prove the role or, quote-unquote, the vision that they want to fill for this football team. Certainly the rookies catch your eye, right? Like I would think a Drew Sanders would get a lot of run. He's not a guy that's in danger of missing the team, but certainly good opportunity for him to go out there and play snaps and get a chance to show what he's capable of in this defense. You think about a Jaleel McLaughlin, another opportunity to kind of solidify his spot on this roster, a J.L. Skinner, a late-round pick, Alex Forsythe, another late-round pick. Can those guys come out and show that they've done enough to deserve a spot? I mean, that's what this game is about to me, and I know that the winning and the losing still matters, and you want to be able to get a win and end the preseason on the right note, but this is about individual guys kind of making that final push of saying, hey, I deserve to be on this roster, or I deserve to have a big role this season. And there's, you could look up and down the roster, whether it's the offensive line, there's still a bunch of spots, it feels like, that are up for grabs in terms of, who's the 7th, 8th, 9th guy on that offensive line? How many do they keep? If you're a receiver and Jerry Jeudy's going to miss some time, can you prove in this game that, hey, I deserve to be a guy that's going to step in and fill that role?
For sure.
If you're, cornerback in a crowded room there, can you make a play on special teams that shows you deserve a spot on this roster? So it's less about, hey, do they move the ball well and, score a touchdown on their first drive, and more, how do these individual guys play? And I know it's always about the team, but in a game like this, you focus on some of those individual performances.
Definitely. And roster cut down will be on Tuesday. So like you said, final chance to really show what some of these guys can do.
Yeah,
sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Eric, appreciate you joining the show today.
You got it, Sid.
Well, that'll do it for today's episode of Broncos Now, Broncos Country. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll meet you right back here on the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube next week for another episode. I'll see you all then.